Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series as I continue to relate the amazing tales of my party's adventure. I'm DMing a group through Out of the Abyss at my friendly local game store. And this is what happens as they go along. So at the end of last session, they had decided to beat feet with the myconids and leave Neverlight Grove because Zugtmoy was in Neverlight Grove, basically, physically, the Demon Lord Zugtmoy. One of my players decided to try to incite a gang war, basically, between Zugtmoy and Demogorgon, and attacked Zugtmoy with a fire spell and said, Demogorgon sends his regards. And in the ensuing drama, Zugtmoy was convinced through a persuasion roll that the character was there at the behest of Demogorgon, but that character was defeated handily and quite easily by Zugtmoy, and their fate is unknown. They're either dead, or maybe I'll bring them back later as a thrall of Zugtmoy, because Zugtmoy has mind control spores. I don't know. Any one of a number of things can happen. But anyway, the surviving members of the group fled Neverlight Grove because the myconids were leaving. They said, hey, you can go with us. So they left. And that's where we're at. So this session is basically an Underdark travel session. It may be the last one I do for quite a while. They're heading towards Blingdenstone. And at Blingdenstone, there's a good chance that the adventure will hit a halfway point. And they may actually leave the Underdark for a while, depending on what they do. It's kind of a halfway point that you can do in the adventure, have them leave at I think, I don't know, I have to check the levels. They're getting close to 5th level. And so I like these. I don't want to overdo them, but I do like these sort of sessions where you're just traveling to the Underdark and having role playing and random or not so random. In this case, I just chose encounters out of the possible encounters, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I think the party did too. So one thing I think I forgot to mention last video, if I did mention it and I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but the monk had been infected by spores by there was a myconid who had been corrupted by Zugtmoy to the point it was almost like a nasty larval thing that spoke through its mouth instead of telepathically, and it had legendary actions, and there were it was a pretty good fight. Let's see if I can find this guy's name again. Yestabrod. I'm pretty sure that's what. Yeah, it's Yestabrod. Well, anyway, I think I forgot to follow up that the monk had gotten in close quarters combat. That's what monks do, right? Anyway, and Yestabrod had released some spores on him, and he failed his. Actually, it's a her. The character is a her. Player's a he. Failed the saving throw and had been infected with these spores from Yestabrod. And at the time, I just went, okay, and moved on. And the player was kind of like, oh, what's going on here? So, what I did was in the following session, I rolled to see. There's a special table for the madness of Zugtmoy. That's what you're supposed to roll on, not the normal madness. Anyway, so I wrote down the madness on an index card and handed it over to the player, so the player would know. Yeah, can't even remember. I think I was supposed to. I think I remember now. I was supposed to roll on the madness of Zugtmoy, but I rolled on the regular madness table. But if you get infected by Zugtmoy, or if you get infected by Yestabrod or whatever, there's actually a special madness table here on Zugtmoy's entry. But I think I just, without realizing what I was doing, gave the player a regular madness. So anyway, and the madness was that they had to constantly brag on themselves and boast on their accomplishments and think that they're the best thing or whatever. And that madness lasts until I think that you have for 3 days in a row, every 24 hours, you do another saving throw, and if they pass any of them, it's just gone. And if they fail like 3 in a row or something like that, I think they're actually dead, if I remember correctly. So but after the first 24 hours, the player passed the saving throw, so it became a moot point. But I think I forgot to talk about that the last time. But I purposefully, just for suspense, because sometimes, just going, oh, what's going on with my character can be, a lot more fun than just coming right out and saying what's going on. So, but I did, it's pretty early in the next session. I let them know what the deal was so they would understand what had happened. But yes, is on a successful save, the creature can be in. This is Yes Abroad with the infestation spores. On a successful save, the creature can't be infected by these spores for 24 hours. On a failed save, the creature is infected with a disease called the spores of Zuchtmoy, and also gains a random form of indefinite madness, determined by rolling on the Madness of Zuchtmoy table in Appendix D. And I rolled on the indefinite madness in the Dungeon Master's Guide because I wasn't paying enough attention. While infected in this way, the creature cannot be reinfected. And that madness lasts until the creature is cured of the disease or dies. While infected in this way, the creature can't be reinfected, and it must repeat the saving throw at the end of every 24 hours, ending the infection on a success. On a failure, the infected creature's body is slowly taken over by fungal growth, and after 3 such failed saves, so 72 hours basically, you could potentially die, the creature dies and is reanimated as a spore servant, if it's a type of creature that can be. So, fortunately, the monk, on the very next subsequent saving throw, after the initial failed saving throw, when the spores were cast at that character's direction, cured the disease, so it didn't become an issue. And I guess you could cure it with cure disease and that sort of thing. So, anyway, I just forgotten to follow up on that. So what we did with this travel session was we did some role play with the myconids, kind of described, hey, you're in the Underdark again, and it's back into that, the beauty of the Underdark versus the terrors of the Underdark. Even when things are good, you're still, many of you are having nightmares and things because of the madness and the spread of the influence of the demon lords. I didn't tell them that's why. I just say you're having nightmares and that sort of thing, but I think they figured out by now why that nightmares get mentioned fairly often. And I told them, I said, you've been in the Underdark long enough that while it's not home, this feels almost comfortable now. You know how to forage, somewhat what to expect, even if it's just expecting the unexpected in the Underdark. You've got 70-something myconids and spore servants with you. There's safety in numbers. So since you were captured and sent to Velkenvelve and then escaped, this is the most pleasant time you've had in the Underdark, even though it can only be so pleasant. But you're traveling towards Blinging Stone. You have plenty of company. The myconids are very peaceful, cool people to hang out with. And this is nothing new now. So we kind of talked about that. Said you still have nightmares and this sort of thing, but kind of give them a sense that this is an almost period of a little bit of we've dealt with 2 demon lords, but hey, now we're traveling in. We know how to handle this, and we're with a whole bunch of other creatures that are native down here. So that, I thought that was a nice little touch. Now I did stress, just like I stressed last time with them, I stressed again this time that unless it's a very unique situation, the myconids are not going to be involved in any battles that the party gets in. I mean, simply because, having 70 NPCs to say, hey, go take care of that, that's pretty overwhelmingly OP, right? Overpowered. So, I didn't say that there would never be any myconid interaction, but for the most part, there won't be. So it would have to be a pretty rare circumstance. And they kept, in the marching order, they kept slipping a couple of myconids in, and I was like, no, they're not there. They're behind you. And they wanted to have Rasharu, the myconid that promised to guide them to Blingden Stone, if they helped them in Neverlight Grove. They were putting him in the marching order. I was, no, he's hanging with the myconids right now. And when you split off, he'll come with you. So, and I guess if the story demanded it, or if I thought that a challenge they're about to run into was going to be too hard for them, I would let a couple of myconids get into the groove, which actually I did allow that late in one scenario of the evening, even though they didn't really need it, and I knew they didn't need it, but they didn't know that. So it was just more for atmosphere and kind of giving a sense of what kind of, are we in like super danger here? So I think that's an effective DM thing to do, is not be a jerk and pull like pranks on your characters, or do stuff just to be jerky. Um, but I do think it's good to psych out your players to the point where they're never quite sure. Like I'm a big fan of, I use the DM screen, and I'm a big fan of just rolling dice every now and then behind the screen and just looking down and going, okay. And most of the time the dice mean nothing, but I'm just trying to keep that sense of, hey, is something going on? Kind of keep the players guessing. And, doing stuff like later in the session, there was this area where, it appeared that they were probably going to be imminently attacked by demons. And they asked for a couple of myconids to come with them. And I said, sure. And I knew that if they kept moving, that it wasn't going to be an issue. But they didn't know that. So I was like, yeah, you might want to take a couple of myconids. And so that just gave them the sense, well, man, this could be really bad. I mean, they were convinced they were going to be attacked. And then when they weren't, I think there was a little bit of a surprise. So, like I said, I don't want to psych out my players just to be a jerk, or to feel smugly more superior or something immature like that. But I do think it's good to psych them out just to keep them guessing, because players will metagame whether they even mean to or not. It's just natural human behavior. Now, some players will metagame more than others, but players will metagame, and you can use that to your advantage to create a sense of drama, suspense. It's more about suspense, right? Because a lot of times the suspense of something can be more interesting than the actual occurrence, right? Stephen King wrote in Danse Macabre, his book on horror and horror genre and all that. The monster behind the door is never as scary as the monster you imagine, and 99 times out of 100 that's true. So, I think creating a sense of suspense or expectation can be a very powerful strategy or technique for a DM. But anyway, back to what happened. They were traveling with the myconids. The player that lost their character last session did roll up a new character, and I'll say how I introduced them as we know. But they basically just made a straight melee shield dwarf fighter, which I have to say was good, because as I've mentioned, this group has been kind of lacking in the straight tank type department. Just I can take a lot of damage and I can deal out a lot of damage, go toe to toe with the bad guys. Now the monks are good at going toe to toe, but they're not melee like just a straight up fighter is, and they've been lacking that. Now they've had Eldith as a backup when I've allowed it, but if everybody's there, I don't allow Eldith to be a combatant unless a new player shows up who needs a character to play, because I don't want Eldith to be a crutch for them not having a good party mix. So I was glad that this player introduced just a straight up fighter. And I personally enjoy playing fighters. Not everybody does, but I think they can be fun. They don't have to be just this two-dimensional, dumb as a rock, go kill everything type character. They can be that, but they don't have to be. So anyway, and I introduced that character about halfway through the night, and up until then they were playing Eldith. So what I did was I did the summary travel method in chapter 2 of the book, Out of the Abyss, and it talks about, you roll 1d6 and add 1, and that's that many days they travel. And in between that, I was picking encounters out of chapter 2. There's all these encounters that I thought would be fun to do. So instead of rolling, and I didn't do any creature encounters. I didn't really do that on purpose. I wanted this to be more about traveling and exploration and some of the encounters types that we hadn't really gotten to. Now, I could have rolled, but I just thought I just was looking through and picking them out, and I was like, um, sinkhole, that looks neat. So, one random party member steps on and collapses a sinkhole and must succeed on a DC 12 dexterity saving throw, or you fall in 20-foot deep pit and take, 2d6 bludgeoning damage. Sure. I thought that was fun. So we did that, and the character fell clunk and took the damage. I think they only took like 2 or 3 damage. And then, because there were so many people around and there was rope, I didn't mess with this. Climbing out of the pit requires successful DC 15 strength to athletic. They just threw the rope down and got him out. I think it was the bard that took the Lipton iced tea plunge there. And I think when we started, I basically calculated everything. They have this on page, what page is this? 18. I don't know if you can see that there, but they have that travel grid matrix thing. And I said, well, from Neverlight Grove to Blingdenstone is 16 days. But they're traveling slow because they have Globagool and they have myconid sprouts that travel slower. Plus, it's a big group, so they're traveling. So I said they're traveling at a slow pace, so that adds 25% to travel time. So basically 20 days. And then they had already traveled a couple of days last, so they had like 18 or 19 days or something to go. And so I just, did summary travel, and then I did encounters in between. And I knew that at the end of, when they were getting really close, but not exactly to Blingdenstone, I wanted to take them into one of these set encounters. They have the Oozing Temple where they found Globagool. They have another one called the Hook Horror Hunt. They have the Silken Paths, which is pretty neat. It's this big area with spiders and spider webs, and you meet these really neat goblins named Yug Yuk and Spiderbait that can be some really interesting NPCs. But for whatever reason, I didn't want to run the Silken Paths at this point, if at all. I may or may not run it at all. But I wanted to go into this Lost Tome of Caim, I guess that's how you say it, that starts on page 37. And there's some, there's specters and a wraith, but they can also find a sentient sword called Dawnbringer, and it's a nice short dungeon crawl with a little bit of false areas, like the main area you think is the main area is not the main area. So I thought it'd be kind of neat. So right at the end of the session, we diverted into there, and I knew when we were really close to Blingdenstone, I was going to end the session, if at all possible, with them just finding this tomb and beginning to explore it. But in the meantime, we did that. We did the sinkhole. We also did the ruins, and the ruins is basically the adventurers come across a small ruin hidden in the Underdark, and as they dig through it, they can find 1d4 trinkets. And I rolled on a 4-sided. I rolled 4, and so they found 4 trinkets. So I opened up the player's handbook, rolled the percentile dice 4 times, and picked out 4, or randomly rolled 4 trinkets. And one of them is neat. It's a little battery. It says a rectangular metal thing that has 2 cups on the end, and if you put water on it, it sparks. And it was actually a battery. You don't come right out and say that, but the players figured it out. They're like, oh, if we understood what this was, this would be a battery. And they got some other neat little trinkets. I can't even remember what the other ones were, but they were kind of neat. Just a fun little encounter, because they immediately wanted to start digging around, so they were just pulling out these trinkets. And then the other encounter I did was the warning sign, which is on page 27. The sinkhole, the ruins, and the warning sign are all on page 27. And this is where they find there's a stalagmite that has that rune on it. And that rune is a drow rune that means demons ahead. Now, a couple of things to note on this encounter. One, pretty sure a stalagmite is the one that goes from the ground up, because I think the stalactites hang tight to the ceiling and the stalagmites are on the ground. Stalag-G on the ground. I think that's my memory trick for that. Somebody else, if I'm wrong, or if somebody else has a better memory trick, welcome your comments on the video. But But those are the passive wisdom perception score of 11 or higher. Spot the following sigil carved onto one of the stalagmites, and it's that sigil there. And then it's also, I don't know if it's in the upper left corner. It's like the main, it's there too. It's like the main little rune or whatever for Rage of Demons. And any non-drow creature that touches the symbol must make a DC 10 Wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the creature's madness level increases by 1. So several characters have enough passive perception to see it right off the bat. They're like, whoa. And Dagger is my blind thief, who's an arcane trickster, went right up and said, once he understood what was going on, he said, I want to trace my hands over this sigil. I said, okay. Just went right to it and just touched it. I was like, yes. But anyway. And as I said, okay, make a DC 10 Wisdom saving throw. He failed and got a level of madness, and he's already at level 2, so he went to level 3 and got a level of indefinite madness. And the indefinite madness that he got was it's a flaw that he only feels sane when he's intoxicated. He must be intoxicated to feel sane. So I said, you have a new flaw. And he immediately started wanting to try to find booze. So, and then everybody else kept trying to, they were trying to figure out what the sigil or the rune meant. And, they were doing intelligence checks, they were doing arcane checks, they were doing history checks, they were doing religion checks, and they weren't rolling very well, even on the checks that may have applied. But they finally, between all of them and Eldith helping out, they finally figured out that it's a drow warning sign that means demons ahead. And they were like, oh, demons. And so, and basically it says if the characters take a long rest within 1 mile of the warning sign, roll a d20 and consult a table. And on a roll of 16 or 15 through 20, it's possible to encounter a demon. But they took it literally like demons ahead. And so they were like talking with the myconids, like, do we want to go back, double back, da-da-da, and the myconids are like, we've already come this many days, and we don't want to go back towards Neverlight Grove, and this is the direction we want to go if we want to go to Blingden Stone, and all this. So they were like, okay. So they decided to scout ahead as a party, and they asked for a couple of myconids, and this is what I was talking about when they wanted a couple of myconids to come with them. And even though I knew they weren't going to do a long rest within a mile, I went ahead and said, sure, yeah, a couple of the myconids come with you. And so they kept like moving forward, doing perception checks. I said, well, you go like an hour or two and nothing happens. And they were like, really? And then they kept going. And I said, finally, it's getting to the point where it's like time to camp and nothing has happened. And they're like, whoa. I think they were really surprised by that. That's why I was talking about building up that suspense. Now, you don't want to always build up suspense and let it be a letdown. Sometimes you want to build up suspense and pay it off with an encounter. But sometimes you want to build up suspense and then nothing happens. And they wonder, well, is nothing going to happen at all? Or is somebody following us? Or, just things like that. So you want to, sometimes you don't want to pay it off. You don't want to, like I said, be a jerk. Because if you did that every time, then, they were like, oh, yeah, whatever, So you want to make it kind of random so they never quite know what to expect. So anyway, and they also said, how do we know where we make camp in the Underdark? And I said, well, this many myconids, you basically, it gets about to the point where everybody knows this is probably a good time we need to be stopping, and you just start looking for an area that's big enough. And if it's some rare occasion where you can't find one, everyone just camps out in this very long, single or two abreast line in the tunnel. So, and players will ask stuff like that. You're like, I have not even thought about this. I have no clue. So you just have to be spontaneous. And then sometimes you're spontaneous in a way that bites you in the rear later because you realize you've done something that maybe contradicts the rules or is going to hurt you narratively later. But then sometimes you just spontaneously do something that ends up being very great down the road. So don't be afraid to be spontaneous and just decide on the spot. How this stuff works. So the other thing that happened is when they were getting very close to Blending Stone, or starting to get close to Blending Stone, I did have an encounter where they basically encountered the player's new character, the dwarf, like up against the wall, like hurt, leaning against the cavern, the tunnel wall with two dead drow in front of them, and and they were like, oh, and it turns out the backstory that the character or the player gave was, okay, bear with me here. This is the third character that this player has had in this campaign. The first player, or the first character, the paladin, half-orc paladin, charged an adult red dragon at level 2 and got killed. And then the second character was the one that tried to incite the gang war between Zugtmoy and Demogorgon, and was somewhat successful, but Demogorgon also beat him down. And then this character was sent because the first paladin, or the first character, the paladin, was of a noble family. And so this character was a soldier with another group of soldiers that had been sent into the Underdark to try to find the first character, who's been dead for quite a while. So, and had been kind of trying to pick up the trail of, these adventurers and all that. But anyway, so I just finally said, well, it's the same old story, the same unfortunate story that groups come into the Underdark and they get decimated, and you end up with like one person staggering around trying to survive. And that's yet again what happened. But their motivation for being in the Underdark was not that they'd been captured or fame and fortune. It was that they were looking for that half-orc paladin who was of a noble family. So, and then Eldith and this dwarf hit it off immediately. They're both shield dwarves. They recognize each other's clans and all that. So Eldith took a shine immediately, and the other party members saw the dead drow and were like, okay. And so everything was cool, and they started traveling with them. Now, they did say, okay, what do we get off those dead drow? And I said, well, since I narratively, I kind of stepped out of the game and did an out of character or whatever outside of the game comments, I said, well, since you didn't actually fight the drow and it was just a narrative encounter, nothing. I mean, you can assume that because, the dwarf, I think Durlin is the dwarf's name, beat these drow so savagely that the armor and the weapons and all that are just toast. But, I'm not just going to hand out treasure. I mean, I don't blame them for asking, like, hey, what do we get off these drow? But, nothing. So, it's like in an MMO when you open up the corpse and there's nothing in there. Yeah, there's a corpse, but there's no loot. So, anyway, so I introduced the new character, and that went pretty seamless. And then they got to a point where they're getting close to Blending Stone, and the myconids are like, okay, you're going that way to Blending Stone, and we're going to go this way. So, we told you we would go as far as we could to Blending Stone until our path took us otherwise. And it was like, okay, so Rasharu, the Circle of Hunter leader, is the one that, or Explorers is the one that said, he got him and said, I'll go with you from here. There was some discussion over Globagul and Shushar, and basically the decision, and Glob went along with it, because Glob could have said, no, I'm not going to do that, was the Glob was going to keep traveling with the sentient gelatinous cube, if you're not familiar with who Globagul is, was going to keep going with the myconids, the mushroom people. And Shushar decided to go with the myconids as well, because Shushar is a very peaceful, pacifist kind of character, and he's kind of digging the way the myconids live. This melding, communal, peaceful, almost naive way that they are. He liked that a lot, so he was going to travel with them. Shushar's motivation used to be he wanted to go to areas that didn't have peace so that he could spread his message of peace, but he's seen too much craziness with two demon lords, so right now he just wants to hang with the myconids. He's a little bit, out of sorts himself after seeing all this stuff. So, and then we did a little role play with Sprout, or Stool, the little myconid Sprout they traveled with so long. It came and visited them, and they were, talking with Stool and all that, so we had a little moment there. And then basically the myconids went their way, and the party and Rasharu, the myconid, who said he would guide them, went another way towards Blingden Stone. They're like a day or two away. And they the only NPC they have now is Eldith, which I'm kind of cool with, because it was kind of fun to have all those NPCs for a while, but it's also some overhead on DMing, like what are these NPCs doing, and to find creative ways to keep them out of solving all the characters' problems and all that stuff. And so I've had this printout of all the NPCs, and as they've died, I put X's on it, and as they've left, I put a circle around it and stuff like that. So it's like now it's, and then there was one, and that's Eldith. So, so that was, and it was kind of, there was a little bit of, these NPCs are leaving. There was a lot of affection for Globagool. Shushar, oh yeah, I mean, they don't dislike him, but Globagool, there's some affection for, and the myconids and Stool and all that. So they parted their ways, and then we did the very beginning of the this lost tome of Kaim, I guess is how you say it, Kaim, and basically all they did was they heard the voice, which is the voice, they think it's the voice of a ghost saying, "Don't leave me here, come find me," but it's actually a sword, a sentient sword. And so they just got in the very first entrance of that, and they were looking at some dioramas and stuff, and they figured out that the person depicted, who is the person who's entombed here, who's now a wraith, was of Netherese, was a Netherese noble. So they actually, when I described things to them, they rolled like a history check or something out and figured out it was a Netherese noble. So when we pick up next session, they're going to continue searching the lost tomb, and hopefully they'll find the sentient sword. But I'm looking forward to a little bit of specters and this wraith, and then I imagine they'll at least get to Blingden Stone, unless for whatever reason it just takes a really long time in the lost. But I can't imagine this lost tome taking more than one session. I'm thinking it's going to take about half a session. We'll see. Sometimes combat takes longer than you think. One other encounter that I gave them that I forgot to mention was on the very first encounter we did for the evening when they were traveling. This is on page 26. It's the crystal clusters. And this is where these crystals that if you break them or throw them and shatter them, they will burst into a blinding light. And they figured out pretty quick, they could use these as basically like flash grenades. So it says you can harvest up to 12 of these. And so they harvested those. Now, I considered inserting another drow encounter with Ilvara, because Ilvara is not done with them yet, even though the dragon interceded in Gracklestug and took care of things right then. Ilvara is still not done with them. So I considered at the end of this session, right before they get to Blingden Stone, having them encounter Ilvara. I decided against that. I think I'm going to have, when they're leaving the Underdark, which will probably be at the midpoint of the session of the campaign, before, like I said, there's a halfway point in this where they leave and come back. I think they're gonna have to battle their way through Ilvara. Like right when they think they're at freedom, Ilvara is gonna appear, and that'll be the last battle before they get to the surface for the midpoint of the adventure. So that's what I'm counting. I may never bring Ilvara back into it again, but I'm almost positive that I will, and I think that's a good place to do it. So sort of overcoming, the boss of the first half of the adventure, I think would be kind of neat. So anyway, that's where things are at. I welcome your questions or comments. I can tell by the comments and the views that there is a steady group of people who like this series, and I'm very pleased that people seem to be enjoying this series and getting something out of it, helping them in their own DMing perhaps. But anyway, feel free to leave a comment. Leave a thumbs up on the video. That helps me a lot. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And I'll be back with you next week with another riveting, exciting episode of the Shane Plays Notes series of Out of the Abyss. Thanks for watching.